So you can't do one table at a time, reheating spinach?
Yes, chef, I can, chef.
Well, wake up!
Yes, chef.
Wake up!
Yes, chef.
Cook the spinach to order, you lazy cow!
Hey everyone, Jem here, and after skipping out on season 23, I am going back to doing placement predictions videos. Though going forward, I will be doing them at what I believe would be the start of the gift phase, rather than specifically after 5 episodes, because, let's be honest, the Hell's Kitchen editing team has gotten better at not spoiling, and episode descriptions for future episodes are not released as early as they used to be, so I think it's kind of difficult for me to make at least a somewhat accurate assessment without these clues, with only 5 episodes to use as a base. With that, we're just going to dive into the chefs who were eliminated, starting with Carlos, who got a 2 out of 5 in the signature dish challenge, though I don't feel he stood out in the same ditzy way as Paul and Alexandra did. The other men weirdly gossiped about Carlos specifically for his poor performance, even though he wasn't the only one, like I just said earlier. I guess this is to foreshadow or to get viewer support for an early boot, and it doesn't help that in the edit during the punishment he dropped a bunch of spoons, which, as I implied, is to boost this sort of negativity on him. And representing Alaska in the season, he did flop on overcooked scallops at the punishment pass challenge and was eliminated in the second episode. Next up is Maddie, and I didn't get first cycle boost vibes from her in the first episode, especially with her signature dish challenge performance, and on top of that, she is the New York representative, and given that New York has a high population, I figured that would be a bit of a boost for production to keep her around. But regardless, the second episode is where she begins to go downhill, in particular with her punishment pass performance, and the first dinner service was the obvious crash and burn for her, and a complete 180 from how I felt based on that very first episode going into this one. She was confused on timings and her salmon sucked, and she laughed during dinner service, and the only thing was I thought Ramsay would trim the fat here and send Chase home as well as Maddie at the elimination ceremony, because the first dinner service looked so bad, especially for the men, and I honestly thought that like 60% of the cast at that point were not black jacket picks in my eyes. But at that point, Maddie was the only one who was sent home. And speaking of Chase, he is the boot in 18th place, right after Maddie in the third episode. And like Maddie, he did have a signature dish performance that was decent, though he was one of the worst performers of the punishment pass challenge. That's something they also have in common. There isn't much else to say about Chase besides the fact that I was a bit surprised that if one person had to go home that night, it was Maddie and not him, because I felt that his error of wasting cheese and running out of cheese eventually over pizzas over and over again was a bigger flaw than what Maddie was going through. But I have to understand that Maddie's attitude was a big turnoff for Ramsay, and I guess he could have wanted the teams to stay balanced regardless. But we all know what happens next in episode 3. He performs alright in the service challenge, but he has some mental health issues and some lack of a motivation, and he needs to quit, and we wish him the best. In the same episode, we have Paul, and Paul had a really bad edit in his first episode in terms of the editors wanting to sell to us that Paul was someone who would be going home early. Apart from the 2 out of 5 on the signature dish challenge, he also came off as clumsy, and to be honest, in his confessionals, I got this vibe that he suffered from dementia at times almost. And as the second episode progressed, he became less visible, though he did perform better, and he was actually better than most of the people that night, to be honest, and credit to him for that. But it was really during the second dinner service that this clumsiness that we saw in the first episode and the whole narrative that Paul was having about his confusion and just being in over his head just came to culminate. There were many timing issues on meat, and he was sent home. Meanwhile, we have Elena, who was eliminated right after Paul in the same episode, and she seemed borderline invisible for most of the first cycle, and she didn't really get much cooking screen time until it was time for her to get highlighted for mistakes. She was noted for having enough problems on fish for Ramsay to have to give her 2 tutorials during dinner service, and when it came to elimination, I kind of figured exactly what was going to happen once Paul gave Ramsay his jacket and Ramsay said, "I'm not done." It just makes sense that she goes here, though I would have liked to see more screen time from her, although I have to admit that little tiff that she had with Alexandra was interesting, so that's something. Then in the next episode, in 16th place, we've got Kat, and not much is there to be said about Kat that isn't obvious. She started out fine, but then she had a poor performance on fish with Maddie during the first dinner service, and from there wasn't much improvement that was shown to us. Her story ended up being another one of those 3 strikes you're out stories, with the last strike being a dinner service of multiple faults on garnish, in particular crunchy carrots. And then there's the Shaheen of Hell's Kitchen 24 with the heavy Reddit presence and his appearances in the after shows, Bradley. Even though many pegged him as a potential black jacket after the 5 out of 5 signature dish performance, he flopped hard in the first dinner service, but he did survive elimination in spite of a questionable plea. He did make gradual improvements, but they were nowhere near perfect, and at the end of the 4th episode, he was given a pep talk by Ramsay about needing to communicate more and opening up. Unfortunately, the next episode saw Bradley repeating those same mistakes during dinner service, and his elimination became very predictable early on, and sure enough, that's what happened. And then after that, we've got Antonio, and unfortunately for Antonio, he was pretty invisible this season and became forgettable very quickly. That being said, in spite of noms being fairly obvious for the first dinner service, he and someone else we'll be talking about in our top 10 were considered by their teammates, in his case for some small mistakes on the fish station. He was nominated, however, after the second dinner service, mainly due to association with Paul on the meat station, and though he survived this, he continued to be invisible as hell. After his last dinner service, it seemed that even Ramsay had had enough of his invisibility and eliminated him, just because he didn't really help to try to salvage John's failed efforts on the fish station. And speaking of whom, John was the next one out. Even though he just doesn't give up black jacket vibes with his first impression, given what Ramsay tends to look for, he actually did have a solid start, and I felt confident that he would make the gift phase, presuming that it starts at the final 10, and he did remain a contender for a black jacket in my mind after that first dinner service. And even though he did find himself on the chopping block one cycle before his elimination cycle, I still felt that he would make the gift phase, at least given the emphasis of how he at least worked hard, even though he was messing up during that service. But it turned out that it was more just to paint Antonio badly rather than to boost John up, because ultimately he became a victim of being an okay chef with 2 notably poor dinner services in a row before the gift phase, which ended his time on Hell's Kitchen at the final 12. And then at the final 11, ooh, my heart is broken, Cara Marie. Anyway, she was known for having a consistently poor showing in challenges, to the point where I think she was just the first contestant in 24 seasons that Ramsay, the editors, and others who were on the show were actively tracking how many goose eggs she was getting for her team in those challenges. Even in dinner services, she was rarely among the worst, but she rarely stood out as one of the best either. I'd say she seemed to be below average relative to the red team. She notably picked up herself and improved during that last cycle before the Cook for Your Life episode, and it seemed that there would be a turnaround arc, but I honestly felt it just was fitting for her to be the boot at the Cook for Your Life challenge, given the running gag about her challenge performances all season, which obviously that's what happened. Now we're going to get into that key portion of the video where I talk about how I think the chefs will place this season, and before getting into that, I'll note that I don't think Ramsay will do any more team switches, meaning that if a blue team member goes at the final 10, then I think that a red team member will go at the final 9 and vice versa, and I'll admit that my picks for 10th and 9th place are somewhat interchangeable. And with that said, the person who I think will be finishing in 10th place is Alexandra. I was getting early boot vibes from her during the first episode, but she proved me wrong on that front even though she did get nominated thrice. Her black sheep of the team arc was interesting, and her fights with Anaya in particular were interesting, and I'm still patting myself on the back for being the one person to go against the tide on that front and predict that Anaya would start to have more people against her over time and look worse than Alexandra over time. That being said, in spite of decent challenge showings at times, Alexandra was nominated 3 times, like I said before, and she even dared Ramsay during her last nomination to send her home if she goes up a 4th time. And in the preview for the coming episode, we see Ramsay asking Alexandra if things are really toxic in the red team, to which she responds yes, and based on the angle of these shots during these moments, it seems that both teams will be losing the dinner service, and I think that Alexandra will be one of the nominees. The toxicity might be referring to Anaya based on the episode's title, and I actually think the team might actually agree with her in this case, and that they'll be trying to push for Anaya to go home, and that she might be the other red team's nominee, and there might be some drama there. But I still think that Ramsay would have more of a reason to keep an eye around for a drama, and I think that he will call Alexandra's bluff and send her home here. 4th strike, you're out. Now as for 9th place, like I said, if a red team member goes home in 10th place, then I think a blue team member will be following suit here. And out of all the people on the board, Jaden makes the most sense to go here. He has been generally subpar in the challenges up until this point, and he had that infamous moment where he dropped his plate and broke it, though it did contain what was confirmed to be undercooked lamb. In dinner services though, Jaden does make sense as the 4th or 5th best man of the season. He is kind of decent, though he isn't flawless. I find that sometimes he might not be vocal enough, and he was nominated by Ramsay at one point for a subpar night on fish. And I could see Jaden performing suboptimally at the final 10, and then once more at the final 9, and then getting eliminated at that point. Now the person who I think will be finishing in 8th place is Sydney. In spite of being quiet, Sydney actually did have a solid first quarter of the season, and I knew she would make the gift phase, and I kept an open mind even to her potentially receiving a black jacket. That being said, she was clearly being purple during this portion, and when she finally started getting screen time, it was mostly to take digs at Anaya in confessionals, who was beginning to have a downfall on her own in her edit, and to highlight what appears to be a possible lack of confidence on Sydney's end. She needed to be coached by Jada during the 6th dinner service and was nominated that night. Now, for the past 3 seasons, the charity night dinner service was held at the final 8 and served as a last chance for chefs to prove themselves as the leaders before the black jacket phase, and out of all the remaining chefs, Sydney seems to me as if she's the one who is not performing as well as the other 7, and I think the trope of her shaky confidence will come to bite her here when her leadership skills get put to the test. Now, I believe that like usual at the final 7, the black jacket challenge will take place, and even though we've got a cast size of 20, I still think that there will be 5 black jackets given out only. And I noticed that there was a trend in a couple of the new era seasons in which 2 chefs would be eliminated at this challenge, where the 7th placer specifically was someone who performed more consistently than the 6th placer throughout the season, while the 6th placer tended to be someone who had a somewhat villainous arc. And for the fun of it, let's assume that this will happen here again, and thus the first of these 2 chefs is someone who I was on the fence about alongside Henry until last episode, during which I noticed Henry having a rise while this person was starting to have a decline, and that person is Chris. Chris stood out early on for winning the punishment pass challenge on the men's side, but he has yet to use it, and I'm hoping he will soon use it because I don't want it to be wasted like it was in season 22. He hasn't been nominated for a dinner service yet, however he has been seen to make a few mistakes, such as scooping out peas with his fingers, even if he had good intentions for it, and setting up an overcooked salmon. In spite of this, he is clearly one of the better men of the season, but like I said, there are just people who scream out black jacket to me, and Chris unfortunately just does not turn out to be one of them. He might be nominated once more in the future after a dinner service, but I think he's going to be eliminated here at the black jacket challenge. And then moving on to the person who I think will be finishing in 6th place, and this is the other person who won the other punishment pass, and that is Anaya. Now, Anaya had a strong start and she showed initiative in terms of leadership, but she gave me Autumn vibes in the sense that I predicted she wouldn't come across as a good enough leader as it seemed on paper. Even though the women were against Alexandra at the beginning, they gradually began to feel more and more animosity towards Anaya, who was coming across as a bit of a know-it-all when it comes to her leadership style, especially from the standpoint of Sydney. Like I implied earlier, I think there will be another showdown between Anaya and Alexandra taking place in the next episode, and though the latter will go, Anaya will be more exposed as more of a know-it-all boss rather than as an effective leader, and this will be a reoccurring issue until she goes here at the Black Jacket Challenge, which honestly is poor timing since Ramsey does not do elimination quotes for these contestants, and damn it would have been nice to hear one about Anaya being annihilated. And now we're on to the 5 black jackets, and the person who I think will be the first black jacket boot, finishing in 5th place, is Henry. I had my other 4 black jacket picks locked for a couple of weeks by this point, but was back and forth on the 5th spot, and like I just said before, I was debating between Chris and Henry for that spot, and now I chose to give it to Henry, who, based on the track record alone, would make sense as the person to be eliminated at the first black jacket's dinner service. He had made some minor mistakes during the dinner service over the stretch of the first half of the season, and he was even nominated once after a rough night on meat. That being said, he has had a really good track record in challenges, and I felt that he was portrayed as the quote-unquote player of the episode last episode, which could mean that he's only going to rise from here. However, I just think that the other players will rise too, and someone does have to get eliminated at some point at the final 5, so my guess is that it's him. And now my 4th place prediction is Ellie. Throughout the competition, Ellie has gotten a slight underdog edit whenever she could, but she has proven to be very consistent throughout. In one of the live streams, I mentioned that I felt there was only one spot in the black jackets for the people who competed in the Cook for Your Life challenge, and Ellie just made the most sense to me as the person who would be that person because her services have been completely compensating for that by that point. I see her continuing to perform as well as a cook on the line throughout the gift phase, but out of the 4 chefs left, she seems to be the most likely to have problems on the pass in my opinion. And look, I'll admit, maybe I'm having a bit of a bias here for this because she does kind of remind me of my Hell's Kitchen roleplay character Chelsea McHugh at times, who, in spite of a generally consistent run, did flop hard at the pass. Moving on, we're at the final 3. There's this 5-course meal challenge that's going to happen. Someone's going to be eliminated, and I think that person in 3rd place will be Anthony. Apart from getting smart with Gordon Ramsay and over-celebrating one night, and then subsequently getting nominated, he has had a pretty good run up until this point. I see Anthony continuing to gain traction and making the final 3. I think he's just going to continue to be consistent and develop in a good way, and he has enough good leadership skills from what I see to survive the past dinner service over someone like Ellie. However, I just just feel like there's a subtle and equal battle going on between two chefs for the crown, and I think that Anthony will get cut at the final challenge because he is not one of those two chefs. Now, before I go through who I think will be the runner-up and the winner between Jada and Lisa, I want to go through who I think they will pick as part of their final brigades, and I don't see either of them focusing on sabotaging their opponent in their decisions. They don't give me those kinds of vibes, either of them. And I do get the impression though that Jada will win the challenge at the finale, and she'll make her first pick, which will be Anaya, and then Lisa will pick Ellie, and then Jada will pick Anthony, Lisa will pick Henry, Jada will pick Sydney, Lisa will pick Chris, and then Jada would not want Alexandra and Anaya to be together, so she'll pick Jaden, and then Lisa will be left with Alexandra. Now, I find that Jada and Lisa are so close, and I find that the reasonings I use to place one as a runner-up and one as a winner are so interconnected that I decided just to post these two at the same time and talk about them both at the same time, and you'll find out which one I'm going to have as my winner as we progress. Now, I thought that these two had an editing dynamic similar to that of Ryan and Jonathan from season 2. Jonathan got a good build-up and seemed like an obvious winner, but Ryan quietly crept up and won it instead. I felt like Lisa initially seemed to be the Jonathan and that Jada was the Ryan of the season during the first 6 episodes, and that this culminated with Jada basically getting treated like a sous chef in the 7th episode. However, I'm realizing now that after the 8th episode, it is the opposite. The attention Jada got in the 7th episode feels now like it's still early game attention, and now we see Lisa finally getting some content in this latest episode with regards to how she needs to believe in herself, and her challenge dish was good after being pretty invisible for a while. This leads me to think that Lisa will get a confidence build-up arc like Nikki's from season 19, except that this time it starts later in the game and therefore will culminate with a decent win on her part. There's an argument to be made that Lisa did have some problems on the fish station in the 7th episode, and the fact that Jada needed to help her out is an indication of how the latter eclipses the former, but we can notice that the edit gave Sydney the brunt of the negativity for it, and even for Jada, it seems she might be making a mistake or two during the next dinner service based on what we're seeing in the preview for the coming episode, so who knows. Additionally, considering that the season is called Battle of the States and that Lisa is representing California, the state that is home to a sizable portion of the viewer base, Ramsey and production would have more motivation to crown Lisa on that front. Thus, by a slight edge, I think Jada will be the runner-up and Lisa will be the winner. So there you have it. This has been my cast assessment and placement predictions video for season 24, Battle of the States. If you have spoilers for the rest of the season, please do not comment them here until the corresponding episodes air. Who do you think will win Hell's Kitchen Battle of the States and why? Let me know in the comment section below. Please be sure to like and subscribe to my channel for more good HK content, and here are other videos for you to check out. Toodles!